medium or platform really reap a lot of benefit from that. So hopefully you're going to solve that problem. Is that correct, David? Okay. Our moderator, you must know our moderator. It's David Berkowitz. He also writes Social Media Insider with me. He actually knows what he's talking about as opposed to my columns, which are just kind of crazy rants. But David is the Director of Emerging Media at 360i. He's also, as of 2 days ago, an expert skeet shooter. You'll see him in London 2012. So I'm going to invite David up here and the rest of the panel, and thanks. Okay.
Yeah, and a big thanks to all of you for not hitting the spa this morning and joining us, because in the next few minutes we are going to totally answer this whole experimentation thing. So you guys are in for one hell of a treat. And I think I am too, because I've spent some time with most of these folks the past couple days, and some of them far more time over the past several years, and I'm just really excited to learn from this group. And it's something that's near and dear to my heart, so a quick 10-second overview. So I've been 360i 6.5 years, and a lot of what I focus on is experimentation. We even just launched a pilot program of our own for working with startups called startupoutlook.com, and it's just, I mean, it's fun to continue experimenting even as we're trying to help our clients do so. On that note, I'm just going to let all the panelists introduce themselves and share what you're doing and why you're on an experimentation panel. And then I've got some good questions, but we are wrapping up soon. Let's keep it interactive, and I really want to know what's on your mind. So why don't you kick it off? And
Sure. My name is Walter Apodaca. I'm the president of Gizmo Beverages, and I can share a little bit more about what that does later. I'm a former executive with a couple of companies you've heard of, Coca-Cola and Coors, and then Miller Coors. I think I'm here because I'm engaged in a pretty extreme social experiment right now, or I made a commitment going into this business as a president and CEO that we would do two things very differently. One, I will not hire a chief marketing officer, and I'll exclusively use digital engagement agencies to proliferate our brand, and if they're not good at what they do, we'll fire them. Outside of that, we can talk more about it as we go on.
Sure. Adam Broitman, I'm the Chief Creative Strategist for Something Massive, and I believe I'm on this panel because we actually have done a lot of experimental work for Red Bull, Ben & Jerry's, Cisco. People come to us when they can't figure something out or they need something that's never been done before, and we pride ourselves on that. So I would say that's probably the reason why I'm on this panel, and it makes sense.
I'm Randy Kilgore. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Tremor Video. I want to first thank Bart for wearing his orange Tremor Video sneakers. Thank you very much. A little branding.
They're branded Bulbstorm, just so you know. I already got them monogrammed. Sorry.
Love it. Love it.
How do I get those?
I would say I guess I'm on this panel because if there is, my lens is, the market is through video, of course, and if there's an area that there's universal agreement on that nobody has understood or figured out, video advertising and all of the different things that go into it, whether it's where do I put it, whether on a destination site or through social, activate through social companies, or do I use long form or short form? What about which screen do I use? Is it 4 screens, 3 screens, etc.? A lot of experimentation going on, so I have a pretty good sense of what that looks like. Again, mostly through video, though.
My name is Michoel Ogince. I'm the Director of Platform and Product Strategy at Big Fuel. Big Fuel is a pure-play social media agency based in New York City, and my role is really twofold and fits in very well with the topic of today's panel. The first is the development of our own proprietary social technology, and even more so that's relevant is the evaluation of emerging social technologies. So I literally spend most of my day evaluating and meeting with startups early stage angel right through to startups, so Series C, Series D, and have already got 100 plus Fortune 500 companies or brands underneath their belt. Every department in Big Fuel runs on technology, and every campaign we do leverages technology. So, I have a strong belief that technology is the DNA of social media. And, at Big Fuel, we're always looking to leverage emerging experimental platforms for our clients. Thank you.
I'm Bart Steiner, the founder and CEO of Bulbstorm. Bulbstorm is a technology platform that provides for very rapid development and launching of all types of social campaigns on Facebook, the web, and mobile, and integration of other technologies and platforms via an API integrator. So we can really help a brand take whatever creative concept they have, and they're not exactly sure how to use it to create the tremendous engagement they're trying to create with their fans and customers, and help them rapidly launch that, test it, measure it, and evolve it. And we work with a lot of very large brands. None of them are David's yet, so I appreciate you inviting me.
Great. Well, let's just start trying to get some definitions set here. So, what do you even call experimentation, and how do you even know, for instance, when you're working on something and like, okay, now this is an experiment, or what does that mean to you? So, a jump ball.
I got a quote I'll throw in that I read somewhere, and I don't know to whom it's attributed, but it's the phrase that different isn't always better, but better is always different. And I think that that's something you have to reflect on when you look at social campaigns. If it looks like everything that's been done out there, guess what? It's going to have similar results. And so if you're going to innovate, you have to go to your creative team, look at the concept, talk to the consumer, and say, hey, this has got to be dynamic and different. And in our particular case, we consistently leverage user-generated content, because your fans and your consumers are going to come up with stuff that you haven't dreamed of. So tapping into that can give you something that's almost by definition going to be distinct and innovative.
So I think a lot of people don't differentiate experimentation and innovation. Experimenting doesn't necessarily have to do with cutting-edge new technologies, and I think all of us up here are doing a lot with new technology, but what an experiment really is something that you haven't tried before, and it's important to remember that an experiment is something you go in with a hypothesis, and you say, this is what we believe, and this is what we're trying to prove. It's not haphazardly using new technologies and just to see if it works, right? An experiment has to be a concerted effort to prove something, or else it's not an experiment.
I'll probably start by saying that I'm the least technical person on the panel, for sure. And experimentation for me starts with, I know it's experimentation when I feel uncomfortable about it. I've worked for some large companies, and as a small startup with a very, very powerful global patent or IP, we believe our advantage is our ability to be nimble and move quickly and not deal with the amount of analytics that go into consideration when big companies make decisions about their brands. And so for me at least, a lot of what we do is experimentation. In fact, most of what we do is experimentation. But the definition of it, at least in terms of whether I know that we're approaching something that can be meaningful, is if not just a gut, but if all of our indicators tell us that there's some spark of interest in whatever it is that we might choose to do, but it feels a little uncomfortable, and others are watching to see how we might perform if we take it on. There's certainly some risk associated with that, but we're willing to take that risk. I like to think of the analogy, very few of us probably drive our car looking through the rearview mirror 90% of the time. We look through the windshield. However, we make decisions as businesses all the time based on data that we've already passed, and it really leaves you in a position to sort of fulfill your own prophecies. So experimentation, at least for me, is taking that risk.
I may have to flip you or arm wrestle you for that title of least technologically savvy up here, because I have at least a fair shot at it. But for us, for how I think about experimentation is through the lens of first the marketer, right? What are they trying to do, and how are they set up? And each vertical is different in their approach. CPG, the way they think about, I think how they would define experimentation, very, very different than, say, the auto industry, et cetera. for us then, what I try to do, because video has so many aspects that are still not understood, the impact on, again, short form, long form, branded content, pre-roll, engagement, et cetera, is to identify, it's an experiment, but it's one that you want to learn from and then iterate on and improve. So what are the 1 or 2 or 3 things that you would really like to be able to, at the end of the next quarter, if you will, pick a right time, say, all right, I've really learned something here. I've experimented with, whatever the right place within the portfolio of video opportunities are, and I've learned from it, and now I'm going to be able to add that to my company's knowledge set and inform not just my own group usually, but the rest of the company as well.
Yeah, so I think experimentation is really client-focused and looking at through the lens of a client. So it means not thinking outside of the box from an agency perspective, but rather working with the client. So the client is thinking outside of the box, and they're tackling or taking upon something that's completely new, whether it's from a technology perspective or perhaps the way the campaign is created. Maybe it's leveraging, mobile and check-ins, which that specific brand has never done before, and therefore they don't know the ROI on it because there's no previous experience leveraging a technology like in that track. So,
we've got a lot of different lenses here, and I also like this distinction between experimentation and innovation. I mean, how important is it, especially just with the clients or constituents that you're dealing with, where it's something that's never been done before, or it's an experiment that someone else has done, it's worked for them, now you want to see how this works for someone else and mix up certain other variables with it, and how important is it for those that you're selling this idea into, that it's never been done before, you're just repeating something and applying it to them?
Well, you gotta know, that's a very individual answer, right? It depends from company to company and area to area. Some people are very eager to, it's a personality thing, right? They're eager to shine within the organization. They're interested in, they understand that maybe getting PR, around a new idea is good for the company as well as themselves. So that's just sort of a know your audience thing. And then beyond that, I think that what we look for, or what's interesting, are companies that have a discipline set up to sort of capture and experiment and look for opportunities. And what's interesting, I think, mostly now is it seems to me like it's a relatively new thing. A lot of the agencies are becoming very involved in the process and identifying opportunities for those clients, and they probably fill that first role, which is to understand who within the organization is the right person to really cling on to and champion an idea. 'Cause that's really important, right? You have to have that person on the brand side has to champion it. It can't just simply be answering emails and saying, yeah, that's cool, go ahead. They have to really push for it as well.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example to kind of illuminate innovation versus experimentation. It was 2 years ago, I would say, when, and this might be a little technical, I don't know, the iPhone used to not have access to the SDK in the iPhone to access the camera, so augmented reality was not possible with the way that we know it now. And the day that Apple announced that that would be possible, the inner geek in me and my company, we all got very excited, and we were working with Ben and Jerry's and with Edelman Digital, and we called them up and we said, we can now do this great thing. And for us, it was a technological innovation, right? And when we told them, we were actually very surprised that they were willing to take advantage of this. But for them, it was an experiment in consumer tolerance to this type of high technology. From an innovation perspective, the campaign was a huge success. It got a ton of press, and it was great. But on the experimental side, it was a success because they learned something, but that they learned it was probably too much technology for the average consumer because not a lot of people did it, right? So just to I think that kind of highlights what the difference is in terms of innovation and experimentation.
Adam, it's very interesting. I think you're highlighting an amazing point that I think innovation drives experimentation. And if there is either or both on the client and agency side, a department or team or strategy to really innovate, then there will be opportunity for experimentation.
And to go back to your original question, when I look at our constituents in a multi-tiered selling environment, a retailer, a wholesaler, and a consumer have completely different opinions about experimentation or innovation. A retailer doesn't want you to bring a wild idea that you promise or believe you can deliver on. They want proven facts. They want to know and understand that the investment that they're going to make in real estate at the store shelf or a wholesaler is going to make in inventory has delivered. However, as a brand, I'll give you a very good real-life example for us. We made a commitment to advertise in a purely digital manner and avoid all the traditional means of advertising, including magazines and billboards and so forth. And probably the biggest gap we have in reaching the consumer is closing the gap between their device and the point of purchase at the store shelf. Unlike many other goods or services that might be purchased, you can't really click on our good and put it into a shopping cart. I mean, theoretically you can, but it's not the way our brands are built. Our brands are built at the point of purchase. So we're forced into a position to innovate through experimentation at the store shelf and find a way to connect the consumer digitally to that experience. Walking into a retailer or a wholesaler and telling them that you plan to experiment with it doesn't necessarily get the job done. So I guess from that perspective it varies, but we allocate a significant amount of our resources to innovation and experimentation at that level.
And do you want to share an example of what you're actually doing to connect the dots?
I'd have to kill you. No. Obviously it's the more traditional means of connecting, whether it's through snap tags or QR codes or text me. But more importantly, it's in the messaging and the creative. And I said earlier that I didn't hire a CMO, and I don't want to offend any CMOs in the room here because there's some very, very good ones. But I've discovered that in a marketing setting in large companies, the highest ranking person in the marketing team tends to be the smartest person in the room. And I didn't want an organization that was overwhelmed with that burden of trying to satisfy a really sort of brilliant marketing person. And so I put that in the hands of my agency. So I can probably give you some ideas of what we're doing, but we're in the middle of it today. Brian can probably give you some better responses with the buddy group coming up. But I can tell you we're very, very excited about them. Probably the best example is, and then I'll try to cut this short, I'll show you after the presentation here what our product does. But it's a little confusing to the consumer. We deliver an instantly mixed tea as an example. The minute you open the bottle, it explodes into color and you've got this ready brewed tea. But on the store shelf, a consumer doesn't know what the hell it is. It's clear. How do you put up a piece of point of sale that tells that story? We have to do that digitally. And so we have to find a way very quickly to get this consumer, most of which are walking around with a smart device anyway, right? To bridge that gap and learn a little bit about our product and then explore. So to add a couple of pieces of texture to that, all of our point of sale, all of our packaging, we've built cues into them that very, very closely simulate or mimic the digital environment. So whether it's on paper or it's on packaging, it looks exactly like it would look on your iPhone or Android from an application perspective. I don't think we're the first to ever do that, but I want to make sure that that millennial knows and clearly sees that this sort of brick and mortar product, that you can touch, feel, that's very tactile, simulates their digital experience so that we close the gap and help them to make that purchase decision. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, well, definitely interesting to me, so I'll take it. One of my favorite spokespeople when it comes to experimentation is Dana Anderson, so marketing lead at Kraft and just amazing presenter if you ever get to see her. So she talks a lot about pilots, and so one conference, she mentioned, pilot is my new favorite word. It means we are going to learn and have less risk. So with pilots, is this a way that you're able to sell in experiments? And then connecting that to the next question, are pilots and experiments measured differently than everything else that you're doing that isn't an experiment?
I have to abstain. Everything we do right now is an experiment, and it's all at risk. That's the life of a startup, anyone who's done it before. So I'll let these guys answer it and maybe be able to add some texture later.
Yeah, I definitely think it's measured differently. I've had the pleasure of working with Kraft, and there are some really brilliant marketers over there. Pilots, and we've worked with them in the past on a pilot. It's a test and learn scenario. It's actually kind of a great thing. You win either way, even if it doesn't work, as long as you have a report that says why it didn't work specifically, then it's a win. So it is certainly measured in a far different way than you would when you're not experimenting.
I mean, I guess I'd ask differently than what? How is it? What is it trying to be measured differently than? I think the answer is no, right? I mean, a good, smart organization is trying to solve problems on a rolling basis, and so they're trying to use pilot programs in order to, bite off the pieces that, ultimately lead you to eat the whole pizza or whatever. Because they, I think Microsoft is one company, right, with a very rigorous process around having, every quarter a set of things that they want to experiment with. They have a team set up for it, and they're tasked with reporting on what those are and feeding them back to the organization. And they always are, tied to something that has been identified as something they need to know. They know they are going to need to know to do better business going forward.
I just have a quick question for you on that. To that point, if it's not measured differently, then how do you differentiate a pilot from just rolling out a campaign?
Something you haven't done before, I think. I mean,
That was actually good. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were done. That's exactly what I was going to speak to. Was, the magic of pilots is the openness to the data and coming in and saying, I'm willing to see what happens, learn from that, adjust. The danger with pilots is they're often really just a shrouded excuse to mitigate risk. Right. And people will come in saying, I'm doing a pilot, when in reality what they're saying is, I want to buy, but I'm too afraid to invest the way that I think I need to make this work. So give me a chance to take a bit of a risk here, but not too much. So they lose that benefit of a pilot, of being able to say, let's find out what really happens here, quickly adjust and learn from there. And that's very often where the magic gold is hidden.
There's an organizational or cultural implications on a successful pilot. Having worked for much larger companies than I'm running today, good pilots uphold the obligation to descend. They give people an opportunity to really examine the data and then make decisions based on that data very, very quickly. I wouldn't even call something a pilot if those two elements weren't present. Then you're doing what I think you started to describe. You really rolled something out that failed, or you rolled something out that was a stroke of brilliance. That doesn't help you with your next brand launch if you weren't consciously aware of the fact that the data was important to learning.
And to build on that, I mean, I would, to answer the other part of your question about are they measured differently, I completely agree with Adam. A traditional project is almost universally radically measured less than a pilot. And we find even with substantial investment in a project, the client will come in and have 2 or 3 metrics that they've preconceived as those that are relevant and run through the project and fail to learn from all the secondary things that could have if they'd come in with a more pilot-based mentality.
That actually gets me back to one of the earlier questions, and it's this trust that I'm placing in agencies to help me make good decisions about our consumers, and it really is our pilot, if you will. I don't believe that I can effectively make good decisions about brand development and answering the consumer's need in our category, even though I've spent a career doing it. I think from a creative perspective, from a technological perspective, there's people that are way better than that, at that than I am. And so I guess technically we are running pilots because I'm looking to our agencies, whether they're creative, which, by the way, somebody said it earlier, forget everything else if your creative isn't good. I promise you that you'll fail. we've got to have a good interaction between the brand and the consumer, and we're not qualified to do that. But what we should hold our agencies accountable to is providing the metrics that you just described that really define the elements of a pilot that differentiate it from, this is our final product to you. Here's what we're testing for you is a different answer.
So I think pilot, the definition could be, the twofold, right? One is to help the company learn something that they need to learn because it's important to their business practices going forward. And two, because there are so many new things coming every day. I mean, to think about all the different people we've listened to over the last 3 days, all have different companies with different ideas. I mean, that's why they're called pilots, I guess, is because they're trying to understand something that's new, that's been presented, that seems feasible, that it will ultimately help them learn something that'll help them move a next brand launch forward or whatever they're trying to do. So is that, I mean, I think that's what's different than it simply being another campaign, because it's mostly because it is learning something new about a technology or a thing that's in the market that wasn't there before.
I think pilot and experimentation is, apples and oranges. There's two different kettle of fish, so to speak. And I'll just give you one example that we just deployed an earned influencer program for a global consumer electronics giant in one of their markets. And, that was a pilot program, but the definition of pilot came from the fact that the client and the brand have done this before in another market. The influencer marketing and the mechanism and the methodology by which we did it was not incredibly innovative. And the analytics team just they've seen and they've seen the movie before. They know what to measure. They know what ROI stands for. In contrast, and this is something we're looking at right now, I know this is a little bit technology focused as opposed to campaign focused, but there's a company that I just met with out of San Francisco called Dropped. It's DRO.PT, and this is an experiment, not a pilot, that I would like to undertake for one of our clients. So right now, and this happens across most brands, all the images that are pushed out in the owned channel, right, Facebook and Twitter, the images are static. And rarely the only ROI that you could measure on an image is number of views and perhaps content and comments and perhaps reshares or retweets on that image. But the consumer or the fan can't really do anything with that image. So Dropped sticks in a layer of JavaScript tags on top of the image that the consumer can highlight, like mouse over and click on them. So if you give me an example, just to say it's an automobile, it's an image of an automobile that's pushed out in the owned media channel, and you can now mouse over, let's just say, the bonnet of the car, and it will say, a pop-up will come up and say V6 engine. And if you moused over the wheels, there would be, alloy wheels, and perhaps if you moused over the windows, there would be an opportunity for the consumer to actually act in a very valuable ROI way, such as click here to find out where you could test drive this vehicle. And now there's ROI on every single one of those points inside the image as well. So what value will that bring to the brand? I think that's an experiment.
So we started to hear a bit about budgets, and Bart, gotta start with you there, because you're mentioning that small budgets are just off. Yeah, it's like, oh, we're mitigating risk, but then not really investing heavily enough. And it's interesting, and for Bart, like for a lot of your clients, then their first program with Bulbstorm may well be considered an experiment, because they probably haven't done that before. Curious what all of you think budgets for experimentation are like, and what that appetite is like to invest in experiments.
I'll speak to our experience in a second, but there's a great report from Altimeter Research on the subject of allocating budgets for social media, and just from memory, about 2/3 of the companies in that survey indicated that they spend about 5.6% of their social budget on complete experimentation. They're focused on R&D. And I would contend that you must have some form of budget established for R&D, or inevitably you're not going to use it, and you're never going to find out what the next great thing is until consumers have moved on. So it's very important. In our case, we've learned over time that the most successful engagements we have with companies over time are those where we actually start small. We've focused on doing projects for as little as $10,000 for a very highly compelling, best-in-class kind of consumer engagement. But the reason for that was obviously the scalability of our platform lets us do that. But just as importantly, it gave us a chance to show, let's do something basic, let's get points on the board of the metrics, and then let's evolve from that. And what ends up happening is the R&D budget then opens up the 95% of the social budget that's left. But it was always important to help these companies understand, let's get in and do something, let's be aggressive, measure it, and move forward with investment thereafter.
I think in terms of budgeting for experimentation, it actually can be a lot less expensive, I think, than a lot of people want to admit. I think a lot of people, it's sexy to say, oh, we put 20% of our marketing budget into experimentation, which is probably bullshit when people say that. And it's not really necessary so long as you have a consistent approach to experimentation. So if it's 2% consistently every quarter, or however you budget, if it's a consistent, you're saying we're always going to be experimenting, then last quarter's experiment turns into this quarter's idea, which actually goes into the mainstream of your marketing. So if you're consistent with it, it doesn't really need to be that expensive. You don't need to at one point say, well, Q3 we're going to spend 30% of our budget on experimentation, because even as the agency who would might receive that budget, it's probably a waste, because you don't really need to approach it that way.
Although there's also that difference between actual hard costs and then time that goes into it. It's like Coke has this framework and what they call liquid and linked, and they say you should focus 70% on what's now, 20% on what's new, and 10% on what's next. And so the idea that they'd spend 30% of their actual media budget on kind of up and coming stuff, probably unrealistic, but experimentation tends to take far longer to actually invest in with resource, because there's that learning curve, right?
Yeah. In fairness, we probably can't speak about experimentation that statically in that we would allocate a certain percent. I wouldn't disagree that you probably should and be very consistent about it. I would go back to my earlier comments that, providing a platform where, well, first of all, I think what was really interesting to me in the short time that I've been here is how quickly we get feedback now about what's working and what's not working. And in an experiment, when you have results as quickly as we have them today versus what we might have had a year or 2, 5, 10, 15 years ago when I started in this business, right? It really makes it exciting that our experiments today yield results and feedback from consumers instantly and tomorrow. So from that perspective, I don't know that I'll change my opinion when we do have a budget large enough to sort of segment it out about experimentation really being sort of perpetual. And as opposed to allocating a certain amount of it to R&D and to how, I don't want to be the guy left behind when the next thing happens. And so I would, thinking about this going forward, probably allocate a significant portion of our resources and budget to being actively engaged in research and development and experimentation, for fear of being left behind if we didn't.
I just want to follow up, because that's kind of the opposite of what I said. So I mean, just my I guess not advice, but not that you need my advice, but my recommendation there is, while you feel like you don't have the money to experiment, if you're even able to put 0.5% of the marketing you do now when you don't have the budget, and you stay consistent, and you're always experimenting, when you do have more budget, you'll have a process for it. It could be very little. You could do a $5,000 experiment every quarter, very small kind of experiment, and you'll be learning the whole time, and you'll actually be able to grow that experimentation process. I would say when you don't have a lot of money, that would be the time to experiment.
Maybe I didn't make one part of it. That's good feedback. If there's an area in our business that we do have money and resources, it is for digital engagement and consumer marketing. That's where we put our money. That's where we've placed our bets. We're building a brand. We're building 2 very important brands. And so from that perspective, certainly would pale in comparison to Unilever or P&G or Coke. But it's the bulk of where we do have resources. And I still feel like I'm committed to, in one sense, being a little rebellious about experimentation and making certain that we don't miss. You know, I listened to a social anthropologist probably 20 years ago when I first started with Coke, who was brilliant in my view. And, you know, I'm sitting here today with all of my devices like most of you are, and this person predicted that. You know, they had thoughts about what we would do as people and how this millennial generation we talked about would interact with brands, and they were right. They were dead on. I wish I would have taken that advice then and made my bet on it. I don't want to make that mistake again. I want to make the same bet going forward and have some experimentation going in sort of a perpetual manner so that those decisions we make about brands going forward you know, are taking advantage of what might be ahead of us as opposed to repeating what's behind us.
And David, I just want to quibble a little bit about the comment that it takes a lot of time. It doesn't have to always take a lot of time to experiment. And frankly, that's our whole foundation of our business models. Let's use technology that's the basis of innovation here to make it easier and less costly of human resources to come out and get the great content, the great creative out there, leveraging the social connections and technology that's already in place. You don't have to go out and build new apps all the time.
So, well, quibble more after on that, but I don't want to derail things there. I want to open this up. So who has questions for this great panel? You can experiment with questions, ask them in haiku or something.
Wingdings.
Picha kucha, you know.
Well, first thing I want to know is where I can get that tea, Walter.
There's one on the table right there.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Just one.
Why don't you just open it? I've got some more.
Can we bid it? Can we?
Hold it up so that folks can see when you. Brian, open it for her, please.
I didn't know you were going to just, yes, okay. Wait, no, you open it. I've got the mic. I don't want to electrocute myself, that's all. Okay, let's see.
It's done.
Ooh, cool. All right. Pass
I had
it
him
up.
open it because I had to tighten it so much I was traveling with it. I didn't
sort
want
of
it
like
to.
to build community. We're all going to take a sip, everybody in the room.
Oh, I've got some more with me. I've got an alcohol cocktail there as well. We make instant margaritas.
Cheers, everybody.
So FYI, it's a 90 psi pressurized container using nitrogen.
What's PSI?
Pounds per square inch.
Oh, thank you.
So
Okay.
basically explodes
See,
into the bottle.
you said you weren't technical. I'm not believing you.
I'm not. That's car talk. I'm like a mechanic.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So no, I did wonder. Wait, hold on. That's good tea. No, it's really good, actually. Anyway, I did wonder, like, if you guys could name a platform that you wish you'd gotten on earlier, something that you're like, wow, I should have seen that one.
I can tell you one we got right, I think, which was about a year and a half ago. We saw the trends of mobile coming, where now we can all sit back and say about half of the people who interact with Facebook are doing so on mobile devices. That was absolutely not true 18 months ago. And we basically bet the store on it and completely re-architected our entire company around being mobile friendly. So
you just made me feel a lot better.
This one we got very, very, very lucky on. But I think there's a lot of companies that are the reverse of that have invested their entire technology portfolio around Facebook. And Facebook as a website is effectively dead. Facebook as a social network is going to dominate, but that's going to be through the Open Graph and 1,000 other solutions, particularly mobile. So there's a lot of times where you do have to take those kinds of risks to be on the right future state of technology.
So you've solved mobile. Okay. Michoel?
Yeah, so I think fortunately we haven't been, I and we as Big Phil haven't been in that position. And I think one of the reasons that is because we're always looking forwards. I actually have spoken in the past at a number of conferences on the future of social media technology. So, you know, two areas right now which I think brands and even agencies are not experimenting with, but social technology is creeping into home appliances and as well as actually, you know, inter automobile, between automobiles. And this is an unbelievable opportunity for brands to take advantage of this playing ground. And, you know, we're already thinking, you know, how are we going to play our game, play chess in this area? You know, how are we going to, what's going to be the strategy and what's the technology out there? And so I think we, you know, avoid the hurdle and saying, you know, I wish we were on there. I wish we could have done that.
So there's always those things you're glad you didn't do, right? And making decisions, saying no. Somebody said during a conference, really important. So I've always been proud of the things we've not done. You know, social. There are a lot of people who are great at it when it comes to video. For us, you know, we're not chasing down like that sort of social. Here, we do that too, kind of thing. So that's part of my answer. But then part of the direct answer to like, what do I think is a really cool platform that it's still evolving, that I'd love to figure out how we could be a part of is content and the redefinition of premium content that, you know, sort of YouTube is driving right now. It's just fascinating to try to think ahead of how people will consider programs in the future, what people will think of as appropriate audience sizes for those programs in the future, and simply the way that content gets created. You know, it's being, you know, sort of seeded by hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars from YouTube right now, but it's still ideas, and it's different than TV, obviously, and so I find all that fascinating.
You never ever missed any platform ever, right, Adam?
How'd you know what I was going to say?
I know,
I mean,
I know.
at the risk of sounding arrogant, I actually have not been in that situation, but at the same time, my Second Life land is very devalued right now. So, you know, it's not always a good thing to kind of be the guy who always is pushing these things. You know, I remember in 2005, we ran, when I was working on New York Times, home delivery, we ran banner ads, you know, mobile banner ads, and, you know, there wasn't a lot of that being done. It was awful. I mean, the results were so bad. It was just kind of, it was comical. We had like 1 click or something. Yeah, and I think it was an accident because people didn't know what to do. But, you know, I've always maintained that because I've been fortunate to have clients and you know, relationships where they feel value even in failure. And my clients with Second Life Islands or, you know, mobile banner ads before anyone was really doing that, they've always been appreciative of the effort, and now they know how to do it the right way. So, you know, it's, now they build better Second Life Islands. No, I'm kidding. That was what I spent a lot of time doing that, which is why I keep bringing it up. It's comical.
I've screwed a lot of stuff up, so I've probably got a lot of real estate on the other side. You know, we don't launch until next month, first of all, so I think we're covering every platform. Brian, I hope we are. If somebody comes up here
Brian.
and tells me.
Pressure's on.
However, I guess if I would say, you know, what is it that keeps me awake at night? You know, the competitors in this business, they're not even competitors. They own it, right? They have the power of distribution. So if you think of the number 1, 2, and 3 beverage companies in the world, they can put the product within arm's reach of every man, woman, and child on earth within weeks. Literally. They have the ability to do that. We don't. And so we've got to find creative ways to engage with our consumers about the brand as we grow the business. And we're fully intent on building our own brand as opposed to divesting ourselves or selling it to somebody else. So 2 things that keep me awake at night, and they're platforms. I don't know if they exist, and this is a bunch of smart people. Maybe you can help me. I'll give you my card, and I'd sign you in the hallway if you had answers to a couple of these.
And you'll give them tea.
Yeah, I'll give them tea. One of them is geolocating and the ability where, you know, I want someone to know if they're driving by a store that has our stuff in it and they meet our consumer profile, you know, whether it's the automobile or their device tells them, hey, turn left, go in this store, they have tea of a kind that you've been interested in because you liked it on Facebook, right? Don't know if it's possible, it probably is. And then the other is at the point of purchase in the store. Paper POS has become, you know, in the consumer packaged goods industry, very akin to what magazines and billboards have sort of become in advertising, right? They're very noisy, they're hard to really attract attention, and they're more defensive for a brand than they are an offensive strategy. I'd like to find a direct digital link between the consumer and the brand at the point of purchase. So those are 2 things that if there are platforms for them and I'm not on them, then I'd say we've missed. But we still have a little bit of time.
Yeah, got that? You on it, Brian? Okay, good. So, do we have any other questions? Okay. I guess I'm getting the sign that it's time for roundtables anyway. So I guess you just are going to have to like applaud these guys. And I hope you learned a lot from this session. It was some good stuff. Thanks.